It was still dark when I woke. The kind of quiet that only happens before dawn. The clock on my bedside table blinked 5:02 a.m. I thought maybe it was the wind against the shutters again. But then I heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not hurried. Not afraid. Just there. For a moment I stayed still, listening to the house breathe. The slow hum of the old refrigerator. The faint tick of the clock in the hall. Then came another knock, gentle, almost apologetic. I pulled on my robe, my heart calm but curious. No one visits at this hour. When I opened the door, the porch light cast a faint halo around him. My grandson, Evan. His hair was a mess. His eyes tired in the way that only sleepless nights can make them. He was holding something. A small paper bag folded neatly at the top. "Hi, Grandma," he said softly. "I didn't wake you, did I?" I smiled, though my chest felt tight. "No, sweetheart. I was already up." It wasn't true, but it felt kinder than the truth. He stepped inside, bringing with him the cool air of early morning. And something else I couldn't quite name. A heaviness that didn't belong to the hour. I watched him slip off his shoes like he always had as a boy, then move quietly to the kitchen, as if the house still remembered his footsteps. The bag rustled when he set it on the counter. "Got you breakfast," he said. "Your favorite, apple scones." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. For a moment neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was full, like the pause before something delicate begins. The kettle waited on the stove, and without asking he filled it with water. The sound of it clicking into place felt strangely comforting. I leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise as the first hint of dawn began to blur the edges of the window. "You're up early," I said softly. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep." He didn't explain further, and I didn't press him. Sometimes the things that keep you awake aren't meant to be spoken, only carried until someone sees them. We sat at the small table, hands around our mugs. Outside the first bird began to sing. Inside the air shifted. I could feel it. Something in him had come undone, and he didn't know how to hide it. Before I go on, tell me, where are you listening from this morning? A quiet kitchen maybe? A porch where the air still feels cool from the night? Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Because sometimes stories like this, they don't just belong to one person. They belong to anyone who's ever felt the silence before sunrise. He looked at me then, eyes shimmering under the soft light. "I didn't know where else to go," he whispered, and something in my chest, something I thought had long gone still, began to move again. The house, the dawn, even the kettle, all seemed to hold their breath. Whatever had brought him here at 5 a.m., I knew it wasn't just the scones. The light in the kitchen was soft, spilling gold across the table, as if morning had chosen to arrive only for us. Evan tore a piece of scone, crumbs scattering across his fingers. He smiled a little, but it was the kind of smile that hides something tired behind it. "It's still warm," I said quietly. He nodded, eyes focused on the plate, as though warmth itself might offer answers. For a long while neither of us spoke. The sound of spoons, the faint creak of the house settling, those small, ordinary noises felt almost sacred. He looked up finally. "You ever feel like you don't belong anywhere?" His voice was low, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he wanted an answer. I took a slow sip of tea before speaking. "All the time," I said. He smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't. He leaned back in the chair, the wooden legs squeaking softly. "I didn't plan to come this early," he said, "but I kept driving, and somehow this was the only place that made sense." I wanted to ask why, but something in me stopped. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and waited. He ran a hand through his hair. "Everything feels off lately. Work, friends, the noise, the pretending." He laughed, a dry sound, almost apologetic. "I guess I just wanted to be somewhere quiet." The way he said quiet made something tighten in my chest. I knew that kind of quiet, not the peaceful one, but the kind that holds loneliness by the throat. "You remember when I used to stay here on weekends?" he asked suddenly. "I'd wake up before everyone and sit on the porch while you made pancakes." I smiled. "You never waited long. You always came in to steal a piece before it was ready." He laughed softly, a sound that filled the space between us like sunlight. For a moment he was a boy again. Then his expression changed. Not darker, just more honest. He stared into his cup, his thumb tracing the rim in slow, nervous circles. Sometimes I think about those mornings, he said. They felt safe, like nothing could touch us. I didn't know what to say, so I reached across the table and laid my hand on his. It wasn't deliberate, just instinct, the kind that comes from years of loving someone, without needing to explain it. His hand didn't move away. He turned it, fingers brushing against mine. Not tightly, just enough to make the air between us still. He looked at me then, eyes glistening not from tears, but from something unspoken. The kettle clicked again, startling grounding. I pulled my hand back slowly, as if movement itself might shatter the moment. He exhaled, and the silence softened again. Outside, the sky had begun to pale, gray giving way to the faintest blue. Birds were waking. The day had started for everyone else. But for us, time felt paused. He stood walking to the window, hands in his pockets. You ever wonder, he said, why some places feel like they remember you? I joined him there, watching the first sunlight slide across the yard. This house remembers everything, I whispered. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's why I came. We stood that way for a long time, shoulders close but not touching, breath visible in the morning light. If anyone had looked through the window, they might have seen just a grandmother and her grown grandson, sharing tea at dawn. But inside that stillness, there was more. Something tender, something we both felt, and neither dared to name. The porch was still wrapped in mist. When we stepped outside, the boards creaked softly under our feet, and the world felt half awake, like it hadn't yet decided whether to begin or keep dreaming. Evan carried our cups, steam curling up into the pale air. I sat on the swing, the same one Robert built 40 years ago, and he sat beside me, the chain groaning gently as it took our weight. For a while neither of us spoke. The kind of quiet that fills you, not empties you. The air smelled faintly of dew and old wood, of lilacs that had yet to bloom. It was the smell of mornings I thought I'd stopped waiting for. Evan sipped his tea, eyes fixed on the horizon. I forgot how beautiful it is here at this hour, he said. You don't see this in the city. I nodded, watching the sky open, pink bleeding slowly into gold. There's something honest about early light, I said. It doesn't hide anything. It just arrives. He smiled faintly, turning his face toward me. That's what I needed, he whispered. Something honest. His words lingered. The swing rocked slowly, a rhythm that felt older than both of us. The chain clicked with each breath, a sound that steadied the silence between us. I studied him quietly. The same boy who once ran barefoot through this yard, chasing fireflies, now sat beside me, shoulders broader, eyes heavier with life. And yet, the way he looked at the morning was exactly the same. Do you remember, I said softly, how you used to wake before me and sit out here alone? He smiled, eyes still on the sunrise. I was waiting for you, he said. I never liked watching it without you. The words landed gently. Too gently maybe, but they sank deep. I didn't reply. I just let the swing move, the slow creak filling the space where answers should have been. The warmth of the sun reached the porch steps. Light spilled across the boards, touching his hands first, then mine. He turned slightly, his shoulder brushing mine. The contact was barely there, a whisper of warmth, but it made my breath pause. He didn't move away. Neither did I. We stayed that way, two silhouettes in the soft gold of dawn, both pretending to look at the sunrise, while feeling something else entirely. He spoke again, voice lower. I've missed this house, he said. And you. The words trembled in the air. Not heavy but alive. I wanted to say I've missed you too, but what rose instead was silence. The kind that carries more truth than language allows. He set his cup down, hands clasped loosely between his knees. You ever wish, he said, you could go back, just once, to a morning that felt right? I looked at him, really looked, and in that light, his face half-shadowed, his eyes reflecting the slow bloom of the sun. I didn't see a child anymore. I saw a man who'd grown into something I didn't recognize, and yet had always known. The moment stretched thin, fragile as glass. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of lilacs from the yard, and I thought, Maybe this is what it means. To remember and forget at the same time. The swing creaked once more. He exhaled. Thanks for letting me in this morning, he said. His voice was soft, but something in it made my heart ache. Always, I whispered. You've never really been gone. The sun finally cleared the trees. Light filled the porch, washing over us, and for a brief, trembling moment, the world felt still, as if even the day knew not to interrupt. When we came back inside, the house felt different. Not brighter, just more awake, as if the walls themselves had overheard something, and were now holding their breath. Evan set our empty cups in the sink. I'll make the coffee this time, he said, and before I could protest, he was already filling the pot, measuring the grounds the way Robert used to. Too much, but somehow perfect. The smell drifted through the kitchen, warm and grounding. I leaned on the counter, watching the light stretch slowly across the floorboards. It caught the dust in the air, turning it into gold. Little pieces of morning floating. Between us, he found the old pan, and reached for the eggs. You still keep them in the same place, he said. Some things don't change, I replied. Maybe that's why I like coming here. He smiled. That quiet, tired smile, that never tried to impress anyone. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, You make the silence feel safe. The sound of the eggs sizzling filled the space where my words should have been. I turned away, pretending to fuss with the napkins, but my hands trembled slightly. The sunlight reached the window, and for a second, his reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. Two faces, 2 lifetimes apart, framed by the same light. He set the plates down carefully. Breakfast is served, he said, but his tone was softer than his grin. He sat across from me, and we ate in that quiet rhythm that only 2 people who've shared years of memory can fall into without trying. Do you ever get lonely? He asked suddenly, breaking the hush. The question wasn't careless. It landed gently like a hand on the shoulder. Sometimes, I said, but I've made peace with it. He studied me for a long moment. Peace, he repeated. Or habit. I didn't answer. Because maybe he was right. Maybe peace was just what loneliness becomes, when you learn to stop fighting it. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing a crumb from the edge of my sleeve. A small gesture, but my breath caught anyway. It wasn't what he did. It was how. Slow, deliberate, like he'd done it 100 times in his mind, before ever daring to do it now. I worry about you, he said quietly. His thumb rested near my wrist, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin. You shouldn't, I whispered. I'm fine. He shook his head slightly. No one's really fine, Grandma. We just learn to look like we are. The words settled between us like dust. Outside, a car passed, a sound too ordinary for a morning like this. He pulled his hand back slowly, the air cooling in its absence. I didn't mean to stay this long, he said. I just didn't want to leave yet. You don't have to, I replied before I could think. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I said it as a grandmother, or simply as a woman who'd grown used to quiet. He smiled. Not boyish this time, but something steadier, something that made me forget how many years stood between us. The coffee had gone cold, but neither of us reached for the pot. Instead, we just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock, 2 sounds that somehow felt more alive than anything we could have said. The morning stretched thin, turning from gold to white. He stood gathering our plates, and as he moved past me, the faint brush of his arm against mine sent a quiet shiver through the air. It wasn't deliberate. Didn't need to be. Some things are louder when left unsaid. By late morning, the light had shifted, no longer soft but clear, falling across the floorboards like a quiet invitation. Evan rinsed the last of the dishes, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, water running over his hands. He didn't ask what needed doing next. He just moved as though he already knew. I was going to water the garden, I said, reaching for the old straw hat hanging by the door. I'll help, he answered, and there was something in his tone that made the simple words feel heavier than they were. Outside, the air was warm, still damp from the night's dew. The garden stretched wide and overgrown, A mix of order and wildness. Like most things worth keeping. I handed him the second watering can, the metal cool in my palm. He followed me along the rows of marigolds and sage. His footsteps quiet against the soil. When I knelt to pull a weed, he crouched beside me, his shadow falling across my hands. You still remember where everything is, he said. Every plant has its place, I murmured. Even the ones that don't look like much. He smiled faintly. You've always been good at keeping things alive. I paused, brushing dirt from my gloves. Not everything, I said softly. The words slipped out before I could stop them. He looked at me then. Not with pity, not even with concern, but with something quieter. Something that understood. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of rosemary and wet earth. He reached out suddenly, plucking a leaf from my hair, his fingers grazing my temple. Got it, he whispered. His hand lingered just a moment too long. Neither of us moved. The wind rustled the tall grass. The house behind us creaked in the heat, and I realized how loud silence could be when you both hear it the same way. We kept working, but the rhythm had changed, slower now, as though the garden itself was listening. Do you miss him? Evan asked after a while. He didn't have to say who. Yes, I said simply. Every day feels a little like reaching for someone isn't there. He nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. I think I understand that, he murmured. His voice was so quiet, I almost missed it. He stood then, stretching his back, wiping his hands on his jeans. I used to come here after school, he said, when I didn't want to go home yet. You'd be out here humming. I smiled. That wasn't humming. That was talking to the plants. He laughed, and the sound was so warm. It almost hurt to hear it. I turned toward the small bench by the fence. Robert built it too, before his hands began to tremble. I sat down, feeling the wood warm beneath me. Evan joined me, the bench creaking slightly under his weight. We didn't talk for a long time. The wind moved through the trees, and a single bird sang somewhere high above. It was one of those moments that doesn't ask for words. It just asks to be felt. He turned toward me, eyes soft in the light. You make everything feel slower, he said. Like the world isn't rushing past anymore. I looked down at my hands. Maybe that's what happens when you stop running, I said. He smiled, but there was a quiet sadness in it. Or maybe it's just because of you. The garden hummed around us. Insects, leaves, sunlight, all blending into one long, quiet breath. If someone had walked by just then, they'd have seen a grandmother and her grown grandson, resting after tending the garden. But if they looked closer, really looked, they might have noticed the way his hand hovered near mine, as if unsure whether to bridge the space between us. I didn't move. Neither did he. Sometimes the smallest distances are the hardest ones to cross. By the time we came back inside, the clock on the wall read nearly 1. The house had grown warm, and the air smelled faintly of basil, earth, and something that felt like memory. I hung my hat by the door. Evan trailed behind me, his hair damp with sweat, a streak of soil across his arm. He looked younger that way, not because of his face, but because the world seemed to weigh less on him here. I'll make us lunch, he said, already pulling open the refrigerator. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted, his tone gentle but certain. He moved easily in the kitchen, as though he'd always belonged there. He reached for the old cast-iron pan, set it on the stove, and began slicing tomatoes with quiet focus. The knife against the board made a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. I watched him work for a moment, the way his shoulders relaxed. When he finally exhaled, there was something oddly peaceful about it, watching him take care of the space that had once been mine alone. Do you ever get tired of being strong all the time? He asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I said after a pause. I suppose you stop noticing after a while. He nodded. I notice, he said softly. You always have that look, like you're holding the whole world still. The kettle began to hum, and I turned away, pretending to busy myself with it. His words had landed somewhere I didn't want to touch. When I turned back, he was watching me, not intently, just quietly, as if trying to memorize something he couldn't quite name. He served the food, just grilled vegetables and bread. Simple. but it filled the kitchen with warmth. We ate at the small table near the window, where sunlight dappled the wood, and dust drifted like slow snow. Every now and then, his hand brushed the edge of mine. By accident maybe, or maybe not. Each time neither of us moved, and the air thickened, not with discomfort, but with something that felt alive and careful. Outside, a breeze stirred the lace curtains. The scent of rain lingered somewhere far away, and the day had that stillness that comes before change. You know, I said quietly, I used to sit here with Robert every afternoon. Evan looked toward the chair across from me, empty now. He must have loved it here, he said. He did, I whispered, but I think he loved the quiet more than anything. He leaned back, his gaze soft. Maybe that's what I'm chasing. A kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. The way he said it made my throat tighten. There was nothing I could add that wouldn't make the silence heavier. So I didn't. We just sat there. 2 generations caught in the same hush. The clock ticked on the mantel, steady, unhurried. The light in the room turned honey-colored, spilling over his hands as he reached for his glass. For a second, I thought about what it would feel like to reach across the table again, like I had this morning. But I didn't. I just watched the sunlight fade from his wrist, and wondered when time had begun to blur like this. When we finished, he stood to clear the plates. You sit, he said. I've got it. He took them to the sink, rolling up his sleeves again. The sound of water running filled the quiet, soft, steady, like a song hummed under breath. I turned toward the window, watching the sky shift, gray clouds gathering at the edges of the horizon. Something was changing in the air, a tension too delicate to name. Behind me, Evan dried the last dish and set it in its place. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost uncertain. Can I stay a little longer? I turned to him, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The words hung there, simple, but heavy with everything that hadn't been said. Of course, I replied. My voice came out softer than I meant it to. He smiled, and that smile, quiet, tired, grateful, was the kind that stays with you long after the day fades. The first drops of rain tapped against the window. He looked out and said, Guess it's settled then. And I couldn't tell if he meant the weather or something else entirely. The first drops began softly, tapping against the roof, like someone knocking from far away. Then all at once, the sound deepened, steady, relentless, the kind of rain that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just listen. Evan stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching water slide down the glass. The world outside blurred, trees bending, garden soaked, sky heavy with silver light. I brought 2 mugs of tea, set them on the table beside the couch. He turned, and for a second, the reflection of the storm shimmered in his eyes. Smells like rain always did here, he said softly. Earth and something sweet. Honeysuckle, I said. It grows wilder every year. He smiled faintly. I remember summers here. You'd let me run barefoot in the rain. I laughed. You hated getting wet. He grinned. Maybe I just wanted you to come get me. His words hung there, light at first, then heavier as they sank in. He turned back to the window, and for a while, we both watched the storm. The sound filled the room. Not loud, but surrounding. It was the kind of sound that made silence feel safe. I sat on the couch, pulling the knitted blanket across my lap. Evan joined me, close enough that the air between us felt warmer than the tea in our hands. He didn't look at me, and I didn't ask why. Some moments are too fragile to break with questions. The city feels different in the rain, he said quietly. Colder, even when it's full of people. I nodded. Loneliness doesn't care about weather, I said. He smiled without humor. No, I guess it doesn't. We sipped our tea. Steam rose between us, curling and fading like unspoken thoughts. Lightning flickered somewhere beyond the trees. A soft white flash reflected in the window. You used to read to me when it rained, he said suddenly. I'd sit right here, and you'd say the sound of rain. Make stories linger longer. I still believe that, I said. He turned toward me then, his gaze steady but searching. Then maybe that's why I came, he whispered. So something could linger. The room felt smaller suddenly. Not trapped, just close. The scent of rain drifted through the open window, cool and damp, mixed with the warmth of tea and old wood. Time slowed, and I could hear the rhythm of his breathing. Between the raindrops, he set his cup down. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he said, voice low. "I just know this feels real. More real than anything lately." I looked down at my hands, then at his. The space between them was only inches, but it felt like a lifetime. "You don't have to know," I said softly. "Sometimes, it's enough just to be somewhere. That doesn't ask you to pretend." He nodded, eyes glistening, the way water does before it falls. "Do you ever wish the world would stop for a while?" he asked. "Just long enough for you to catch your breath?" "All the time," I whispered. He leaned back, his shoulder brushing mine. Barely, like an accident that wasn't one. Neither of us moved away. The swing of the clock on the mantel ticked slow and soft, a counterpoint to the steady rhythm of the rain. Outside, thunder rolled far off, gentle, not frightening, more like a sigh from the sky. Evan exhaled too, his breath deep, steady. "I should probably go soon," he said. But he didn't stand. He stayed there beside me, the kind of stillness that feels like a decision. I didn't tell him to stay, and I didn't tell him to leave. I just sat with him, listening to the rain, knowing that sometimes the things that haunt us aren't the storms themselves, but the quiet moments we share inside them. By evening, the storm had passed. The air felt washed clean, soft, damp, smelling faintly of earth and pine. The light from the kitchen lamp glowed golden, pooling across the floor, and catching in the steam that still curled from the kettle. Evan had stayed. Neither of us said it aloud, but neither of us expected him to leave. The rain had made the roads slick, or at least that was the reason we told ourselves. He was sitting at the table, sleeves rolled, reading an old cookbook that had belonged to Robert. "Do you still make the soup from this page?" he asked, his thumb brushing over a stain where years ago I'd spilled thyme and olive oil. "Sometimes," I said, "mostly when it's cold." "It's cold now," he said, closing the book softly, as if the decision had already been made. We cooked together, slowly, quietly, moving around each other, like people who've shared too many seasons to need words for directions. He chopped the onions, I stirred the pot. The smell filled the kitchen. Garlic broth, something sweet and sad all at once. When it was ready, we sat down across from each other, 2 bowls between us, steam rising in delicate ribbons. Outside, the world was dark and still, a single cricket starting its lonely song beneath the porch. He took a sip, closed his eyes, and smiled faintly. "Tastes like the house," he said. "Like it remembers." I laughed softly. "This house remembers everything. Even me. Especially you." His gaze met mine then, and for a moment, the air shifted. It wasn't a look that asked for anything, just one that saw too clearly, too long. We ate slowly. There was no rush, no noise except the occasional clink of spoons. But beneath that quiet rhythm, something moved, a pulse, an ache, a recognition neither of us wanted to name. When the bowls were empty, I reached for the napkins, but my hand brushed against his. He froze. So did I. The contact was small, barely a whisper of skin, but it carried every unspoken thing between us. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand slightly, his fingers resting near mine, not holding, not demanding, just there, present. The lamp above us flickered softly. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under its own weight. I could hear my heartbeat, steady but unsure. He broke the silence first. "You make it easy to breathe here." His voice was low, steady but trembling at the edges. "I don't feel like I have to be anyone else." I wanted to tell him that I felt the same, that the house hadn't felt alive like this in years. But the words caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. I stood instead, taking the dishes to the sink. He followed, close enough that I could feel the heat from his skin. I washed, he dried. Neither of us spoke. The space between us had grown both smaller and larger all at once. When I turned, he was closer than I expected. The air shifted, not cold, not warm, just charged. He reached up, brushing a stray wisp of hair from my cheek, his fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, the world stopped. There was no sound, no breath, only the quiet ache of almost. Then he stepped back, as if the room itself had reminded him where we stood. "I should help you lock up," he said. His voice was careful now, steady again, but softer than before. We moved through the house together, turning off lights, closing curtains, checking windows. When we reached the hallway, the lamp above us buzzed faintly, casting a warm glow over the old wallpaper. He paused, looking down at the photograph of Robert and me, that still hung by the door. "You loved him," he said quietly. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then he was lucky." I couldn't find words. He stepped closer, not enough to cross the line, but enough for me to feel the quiet gravity of him. And in that space between our breaths, something unspoken pressed against the air. Something that didn't belong to the past, or to what comes after midnight. "Good night," he murmured finally. I nodded, but when he walked down the hallway, toward the guest room, the house didn't feel empty again. It felt awake. The morning came softly, as if it didn't want to wake the house. Light slid between the curtains, thin and pale, stretching slowly across the floorboards. The rain had stopped, but the world outside still smelled of it. Fresh, clean, tinged with something almost sweet. I opened my eyes to the silence, and knew before I moved that the house was empty. It wasn't the kind of knowing that surprises you, just the quiet certainty that fills the air when something has shifted. I pulled on my robe, the same one from yesterday, and stepped into the hallway. The door to the guest room was open, the bed neatly made. His jacket was gone from the chair. The window was cracked just enough to let the cool air in. In the kitchen, the faint scent of coffee lingered. Not strong, just enough to remind me someone had stood here before me. The mugs were washed, the sink dry, and there, beside the kettle, sat a small folded note. I didn't open it right away. I just looked at it. The neat handwriting, the way the paper curled at the edge, as if it had been held too long before being left behind. Finally, I unfolded it. Just one line. "Thank you for letting me come home even for a while." No signature. It didn't need one. I stood there for a long time, holding that piece of paper, like it might vanish if I breathed too hard. The clock on the mantel ticked, steady and familiar. The same sound it had made yesterday, and yet now it felt different. I poured myself a cup of tea, though I wasn't really thirsty. Steam curled upward, catching the morning light. Through the window, the garden shimmered with dew, each leaf glistening like it had its own secret. The bench by the fence stood empty, but I could still see him sitting there, head bent, hands clasped, listening to the world in his quiet way. I took my tea to the porch. The swing waited, still damp from the rain. When I sat down, the chain groaned softly, a sound that felt almost like breath. The world was awake again, birds calling, a car passing in the distance, the soft hum of morning returning. But beneath it all was something still, a silence that felt full, like the space between heartbeats. I traced my fingers along the armrest, feeling the worn grooves of old wood. Robert had carved them decades ago, and now, all these years later, Evan's hand had rested there too. Different lifetimes, same touch. I looked out over the yard, the light falling golden through the branches, and thought about the words he'd left behind. "Thank you for letting me come home." Home. What a small word for something so heavy. It isn't just walls and floors. Not really. It's where someone once looked at you and saw who you were beneath the years. And maybe, just maybe, that's what he came searching for. I set the note on the table beside me, watching the wind tug gently at its corner. Part of me wanted to chase him, to call, to ask what the morning meant. But I didn't. Some moments aren't meant to be followed. They're meant to stay right where they are. Like the first light after a long night. Fragile, fleeting, but enough to remind you that you're still alive. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind move through the trees. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't hurt. It simply was. Sometimes, the people who enter our lives quietly leave the loudest echoes behind. And sometimes, love doesn't ask for a name. It just asks to be remembered. If this story found you today, even a little, take a moment to breathe with it and tell me, Where are you listening from? A small kitchen, a quiet porch, a place that holds its own memories. Wherever that is, I'm glad you're here. Because Grandma's true stories don't just belong to one person. They live in all of us. If this one touched you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who might need a reminder. That connection can still find us, even in the quiet hours before sunrise. Until next time, take care of your mornings and the hearts that still remember them.